Thank you very much, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. People who listen to my show know I have a slogan that real estate is the new porn. I personally have been surfing MLS for years, since I was a teenager. My partner will frequently bust me late at night drooling over a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom condo. I initially fell in love, I have to say, with real estate listings only because I love the creative language that is used by real estate agents in listing a house. I learned very quickly, this was in Montreal, but I think it's roughly the same. A home that is listed as a place for people with imagination means it's a dump. Freshly painted, there's probably mold. My favorite was always very clean, which means someone died there. But I don't want to delay the beginning of this panel because we've talked about how people live, and now we're going to talk about how they get around. And the two, as our previous speaker indicated, are intrinsically connected. And I can also say that I owe much of my living to congestion because that's what keeps people stuck in their cars listening to me. But we've focused down, and then I hope that we'll be able to mix it up a little bit, but we've focused down on 5 key questions. But we wanted to start, before we go for the first question, with, I sort of feel like I'm doing a game show. This would be the open category worth 200 points. But to allow our speakers to kind of frame the discussion from their own perspective and expertise. So Ben, if I can begin with you.
Sure. So Thursday of this week is an interesting 10th anniversary. Anyone know what Thursday is the 10th anniversary of? The introduction of the Toronto Land Transfer Tax. And, yeah, I know. Don't shoot the messenger here. My first ever study at the CD Howe Institute when I was an infant, right after the tax came in place, was on the land transfer tax, and here we are 10 years later. It's so far been the goose that's laid the golden egg for the city of Toronto, but one day when the real estate markets take a turn south, it'll be a goose that lays a rotten egg. And we're going to see a real need to return back to the question of whether the city of Toronto should be so reliant on land transfer tax. And the market outlook gets into more detail about the economic costs of the land transfer tax. But the bottom line is it means that fewer people are able to live near their work, live in a home that best suits their needs. And the land transfer tax exacerbates the economic cost of congestion, which we'll get into in more detail. But I want to remind people that congestion is a political choice. It's a choice that is a function of the lack of political will to both have put in place proper road pricing, and when we talk about traffic management, we have to expressly talk about road pricing, not necessarily putting a price on every single lane, but on some of the lanes, but also how we make our choices. So we'll get into that in more detail, and Jan's group has done a great job of looking at the proper structure of transit governance.
Jan.
Okay, thanks. Great to be here. John, sorry, we're working on solutions for more in the morning, but hopefully we can figure out other channels for you to keep people entertained without congestion. We're really engaged with TREB. You folks have been just tremendous through your policy team with a lot of the work that we've been doing. I wanted to quickly lay out how we're looking at this issue, but first with an illustration of how critical it is to enable growth by staying ahead of demand, rather than trying to play catch-up, which is where we are today. Between 1950 and 1970, the population in Toronto doubled from 1 million to 2 million, the good old days. During that time, the 401, the QEW, GO Transit all came into effect. Toronto Island's backup airport in Malton was sold to the federal government to become the Toronto International Airport. These investments served us well. By 1980, Toronto surpassed Montreal in population and economic importance to become Canada's largest commercial center. Today, we're the fourth largest city in North America and generate more than 20% of the entire country's GDP. We're home to Canada's top 2 largest employment zones, downtown Toronto and the Pearson Airport employment area. And over the coming decade, we're forecasting another 1.5 million people to move into the region. We're unique in North America for the density of manufacturing and the density of technology that exists here. Fueled by NAFTA, our fully integrated cross-border supply chain has created 2 million jobs in Canada, the bulk of them here in the Golden Horseshoe. Our tech talent, our universities in the corridor are attracting activity from our Canadian firms and from global technology players like Google, Amazon, and GM. Yes, I said GM, who 10 days ago opened in Markham their Canada Technical Centre, hiring 1,000 engineers who will be programming the software for their autonomous vehicles and infotainment globally. So we've got to negotiate content out of NAFTA to make sure these jobs stay secure. But for all this progress, we're stuck. We're stuck in traffic. Since 2010, the board has been advocating for more regional transit capacity. We've got a $6 billion productivity gap facing our employers as a result of our workforce being stuck in congestion. Daily, 1 million cars move workers in and out of the Pearson employment zone. Our downtown employers are seeing talent leave the city, and in some cases the province, as young professionals with families juggle housing costs, commute times, and access to childcare. Missing in the conversation on congestion has been the region's competitiveness in goods movements, a topic we tackled in 3 reports last year. What we found were serious delays to the $3 billion worth of goods moving through the corridor every single day. Among our biggest pain points is the area around the 401. The airport's there, and in addition to those million cars a day that are moving workers around the airport, 45 million passengers annually come in and out of the airport, mostly by car. Trucks move goods from Pearson, which is Canada's largest cargo airport, to CN's intermodal hub in Brampton or onto the 400 series. So good luck to GM in getting your just-in-time inventory from cross-border from the US into production in Oshawa, or Cisco, Canada's largest food distributor, getting foods downtown to our Starbucks and to other important providers of nutrition. So what we've been doing is advocating 3 solutions. The first, Superlinks, a proposal we've recently put forward to consolidate our 11 different municipal transit systems into one super agency with the scale, the funding, and the speed to deliver a fully integrated regional transit platform and to make full use of the real estate attached to those stations for the development of more commercial space and more housing. Second is a comprehensive good movement strategy that makes better use of existing infrastructure and current technologies to manage goods flows, better land use planning around industrial lands, and a long-term plan for goods corridors. And finally, a national urban plan. Along with the CEOs from Canada's 7 largest cities, we're going to be in Ottawa soon advocating at the federal level for support of economic planning for funding of the infrastructure needed to support the growth of our largest cities. So as I said in my opening, to enable growth, we need to plan ahead to build a capacity. The last thing we want to hear in reference to Toronto was the term in its heyday, because we want the heyday to be ahead of us, not something that was behind us because we couldn't get ahead of the curve. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Eric.
Well, I'd like to thank Treb very much for inviting us here and be able to participate in this debate. I also congratulate Treb on recognizing the importance of transportation within the overall land development real estate question. I'd just like to pick up on a couple of Jan's comments in terms of growth. I think something that Torontonians, even though we're living through it, don't understand is the phenomenal growth that's gone on in the city. We've gone from a sleepy little provincial town to one of the world's great cities, and that comes with tremendous stresses, and those stresses are going to be with us going forward as we continue to grow. John, actually, I don't think you have any worry about us getting rid of congestion. Big cities are congested. The question is how much congestion and how we manage that, and how we balance our transportation systems to minimize the congestion and be as effective as we can. And I think we're going to spend a lot of time this morning talking about congestion, traffic, etc. I hope it's recognized that that while roads are extremely important and cars and trucks are very important to us, they will always be with us. They are not the solution. The biggest problem for the city like Toronto is as cities get larger, cars and roads don't scale well. I often lecture on the physics of transportation, and there are fundamental limits on how much we can do with roads. So while we want to be as efficient as possible, we need other solutions, and that's where transit comes in. I think it's obvious to everybody we've woefully underinvested in transit over the last decades, many decades, and so not only do we have to cope with future growth, but we have to catch up, and as we all know, that's very challenging. But transit alone, even that, doesn't solve all the problems, because transit and land use, and this is where the real estate and development come in, are intertwined. We have a further problem we have in this region is we've built so much of the region in a way that has met market demands and so forth, but it's not conducive easily for cost-effective, attractive transit. We have vast areas of very low-density areas, single-use areas that are just, again, the physics of it, the economics of it, it's very hard to provide cost-effective transit in those areas, and that's one of the reasons we see such an auto-dominated area. And so I think our real challenge is how do we deal with this? How do we both evolve the transportation system, but also retrofit, redevelop as we can, infill where we can to get a better balance between land use and transportation?
All right, thank you. Here's what I'd like to do. I believe you've seen all of the questions that we prepared. There's 5 key questions to kind of direct the discussion. Each of our panelists will speak briefly to each of them. And, I would hate to just do 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So if there are people who are really fired up about a given question, give me the hand signal. If you want to discuss amongst each other or there are differences of opinion, we'd love to hear those as well. Our first question, increasingly the Golden Horseshoe is defined by congestion. In the Toronto area and in Hamilton, Burlington, congestion is a daily fact of life. How do you believe this is impacting people's day-to-day lives?
So there are 2 ways to think about congestion. There's the visible cost of congestion and there's the hidden cost of congestion. So each and every person in this room, you suffered through what's called the visible cost of congestion, where you suffered through the traffic on Don Mills or the Don Valley Parkway. It took you a little bit longer to get here. That's that visible cost of congestion. And a number of estimates put that at like $6, $7, $8 billion a year. But there's also something called the hidden cost of congestion. Because at each and every one of your table, there's an empty chair, or maybe 2. That's the hidden cost of congestion, where someone made it, or wasn't able to make it to this event. They either couldn't make it because traffic in the day was too bad, or they weren't planning to come here in the first place. And imagine that issue happening across the economy. That's when businesses don't start up. That's when people decide, I'm just going to stay in my low-income part of Ontario or elsewhere, and not get a good-paying job in Toronto. There are all these visible and hidden costs of congestion that we really need to be thinking a lot harder about.
$20. That's how much a woman serving coffee at a private club in downtown Toronto has to pay for one-way transit to get from Mississauga to downtown Toronto. She's not making a lot of money. It's the transit engineer that we desperately need to get our transit built that is a newcomer that turned down an entry-level job in Mississauga because he lives in Scarborough. And it was too expensive for him to have a car and drive there every day and have enough money left over at the end of the month so he could help his son in sports and other activities to get assimilated in Canada. These are some of the real-life costs of transit. We have a lot of discussion, our policy team, our members, and the thing is, it's the parts of our community that aren't engaged that really need to be. And to me, that's the real cost of congestion. The fact is that we've got huge demand for talent. There's a lot of job opportunity, but we simply can't have people in our lower income neighborhoods easily get access to the jobs that we desperately need them to fill.
Stress. It's not just the time spent in the car being stuck in traffic. That's time that's not with your family. It's time that you're not doing other things. And there's very real stress involved in being involved in that congestion. Health, obesity in Canada is at an all-time high. There's many reasons for that, but the sedentary lifestyle we have, that we spend too much time in our cars instead of walking, biking, doing other things. Serious health-related things. Air pollution, again, health. There's various quantifications of how many premature deaths there are in this region because of excessive air pollution. Again, that comes from many places, but transportation is a big part of it. Greenhouse gases. We tend to focus on congestion, but arguably the single biggest challenge facing humanity is climate change. Transportation is responsible for, I don't know, it's 35% of Canadian greenhouse gases. That's even in competition with the oil sands and their production. That percentage has gone up. Percentages most other areas have gone down, and we are still very fossil fuel dependent. So the hidden costs, transportation is like the iceberg. We see that $6 billion in congestion costs, the 90% are hidden in all these various areas.
We're going to talk solutions in a couple of minutes, but we'll set that aside for the moment because I wanted to bring this back to a real estate question in many ways. I think people are deceiving themselves if they consider that price is the only factor. I mean, you get into all sorts of other things, including school districts and stuff like that. But I wonder if you can think through some of the impacts of congestion and commuting issues in terms as a force that would prompt somebody either not to live somewhere or to live somewhere. Who wants to start with that? Jan?
I'll start with that. We've got a young professionals network at the board. It's about 1,400 young professionals working for our members of all company sizes. We surveyed them extensively over the summer on housing, and here's what we found. 60% of them would choose to live outside the downtown core if they had an easier commute. And therefore, we're very pro starting to get away from these architecturally stunning surface level GO stations into something that has a condo on top, because there's nothing better to be directly above your transit to get into downtown. But 60% would choose to live outside the core if it was easier to get in and out.
Ben?
So this goes to what I said about the land transfer tax, and the market outlook gets into more detail. Studies around the world, whether you're talking about Australia, the UK, US, Britain, have shown that the ability for people to move is dramatically lower when there's a large land transfer tax. But the kinds of moves that you see diminish with the land transfer tax are the ones that are the sort of things that are a response to congestion. A good example are moves closer to work. Those are the kinds of moves that people decide not to make within the same city that a land transfer tax really slows down. So again, this shows that a land transfer tax makes this congestion in Toronto so much worse.
And I think perhaps arguably historically people didn't pay much attention to commuting costs in general. They perhaps moved to a suburban area because for the low-cost housing, and I think perhaps to their surprise they discovered how much they were spending on transportation, and obviously that's gotten worse. We did a study a number of years ago for Neptus where we looked at housing costs across the GTA and transportation costs, I think the actual transportation costs people face were quite staggering, and this holds in every city. The number one expenditure for most households is on their housing. The number two, and not that far behind when you take the full cost accounting, is transportation, and that's getting worse. And if we look at low-income households, we're very concerned about affordable housing. Affordable transportation for these people is also a huge issue because often they have to locate in places that are not transit supportive, and so they may have to have 1, 2, 3 cars, even though they really can't afford them. So it's an affordable transportation question as well as an affordable housing question.
I'd love to follow this question up with another one, which is the impact of how things are changing, especially in the GTA, as a forcing issue on lifestyle. And I'll cite a couple of things. In many ways, the downtown is becoming more Manhattan in its lifestyle. People have tiny kitchens, and they don't cook in them. They will, increasingly eat out. The public park is their backyard because they don't have a backyard. That's even just sort of the youngins in their first condo. But now we have the issue, for example, of multi-bedroom condos and apartments for families. And it was only, I think, about 4 years ago that our deputy mayor said you couldn't raise a family in the city's core. And I think we're learning from lifestyle changes of people in Toronto that you very much can. And I don't know if this is necessarily outside. Go ahead.
Okay, well, it's very interesting. Now, full disclosure, I moved into this job 3 years ago. I lived in Hong Kong for 14 years. So teeny tiny housing is what Hong Kong's all about. We do believe, and we've been working to connect IKEA with some of our condo developers to prove that you can fit a family of 4 and a one-bedroom plus den in the downtown core. Because some of the property sizes that we've got, 600, 800 square feet, those are palatial by Hong Kong standards, and IKEA was the key. If you got the product developed and designed properly with all the proper built-ins, it's incredible how much space you can create. So stay tuned.
Okay. Anyone else with thoughts on that one? All right. Let's move to trying to think about some solutions, and perhaps this will be a livelier segment than others because people conflict over the solutions. We have the whole notion of the war on the car, amongst other things. We have John Tory's Smart Track, which he told me last week he's moving ahead with. It's actually underway. So people will debate the efficacy of all sorts of things, bike paths, more transit, the downtown relief line. I don't know who wants to go first, but congestion fees haven't even been mentioned, which is a disincentive for the use of the car. Ben?
Yeah. So I say this with great trepidation with Eric Miller here, who's kind of the OG of transportation planning, especially with data. But think of congestion as like an episode from The Three Stooges, where the Three Stooges walk up to a door and they all try to get through the door at the same time. And they can't get through. What we really need is we need one of those stooges to step back and say, well, you two go through. And the best way to do that is through a price. And so that effectively is what congestion pricing is. It says, all right, two of you can come through because that's all that can physically go through. And guess what happens? Rather than no one going through, we have two people go through the door. That's what a congestion price does. It actually increases the capacity of a road. And we can do that incrementally. The best kind of congestion pricing around the world, especially in the US, is what's called a high occupancy toll lane, where it's not putting a price on every single lane on the highway. That was what we were talking about almost exactly a year ago with the Don Valley Parkway and the Gardiner. But rather than putting a price on the entire part of a freeway, just put it on one lane, the inside lane. And that gives you more, by pricing just 1/3 of the lanes, you actually get about half of the overall benefit, the economic benefit, where people who really need to get somewhere have that congestion-free option. But people who are willing to wait in traffic a little bit longer, listen to a podcast, listen to some music, don't mind the congestion as is, they're actually able to not pay at all. But that price increases the overall capacity of the highway, which is a really important takeaway that people have to remember.
Interesting, not to frame the discussion too much, but I think there was a report last year that came out about how long people's commutes are in major Canadian cities. Toronto was an absolute nightmare, but they also found that people didn't really mind spending all of that time in their car, which is kind of counterintuitive. But can I ask you, Eric, if you have a preferred solution?
And I could talk all day about this and with charts and diagrams and again the physics of it all. But Ben's absolutely right, and I think it's something we don't understand that when you have a traffic jam, you actually lose capacity on the roadway. And if you could control things so that you don't ever have breakdown, you'll get far more cars. You go faster, and you get far more cars through. So I think one of the worst things that's happened to us recently was the province killing the proposal for the Gardiner-DVP road tolls for about a week. We were all very excited. We thought we were actually making some progress. I mean, the proposal to just, just naively toll, it wasn't a congestion price per se, but we could have had that discussion. We have to get back there. So I think, yes, we have to have tolling. We need ambitious public transit projects. You mentioned Smart Track. I'd be happy to talk at length about Smart Track. For some reason, I think maybe because it was politicized by Tory during the last election, and perhaps there's some turf wars between TTC and Metrolinx. I don't think Smart Track is understood by people. In my view, it's the single biggest transit investment we could be making in this region if we built it right. It would be second only to Yonge Street. It would, in terms of its impact, particularly the eastern part could be the Yonge Street subway for Scarborough. It could be the subway Scarboroughians are dying to get.
Why so radical? I mean, I know you said you could get into this and dive deep, but I think most people don't think much about Smart Track. Why is it such a radical impact?
Because the demand patterns, we actually look at who needs transit and where people are traveling from, it actually meets the need. One of the complaints we have about many of the projects, some of which are approved, is there are lines on the map that a politician has drawn. Nobody's done the analysis to discover whether they actually serve the people. And if you actually do the analysis, and that's not to say there aren't other good projects, but Smart Track actually taps into the demand patterns that need to be served in a very, very effective way. There's a huge latent demand out there. I mean, we see we see so many people taking the Don Valley Parkway, et cetera. in our analysis, there's a huge latent demand for good transit. If we build smart transit in smart locations and provide it, there will be a huge uptake.
Okay, and I have to say the road tolls is what got us all fired up because we were so disappointed when that backed down. Our biggest need for transit is in the city of Toronto. Population demand, all of that, and the city simply doesn't have the funding to get it built. We've got a brilliant transit network strategy that Jen Kiesmat, our former chief planner, put in place. The problem, folks, is we just don't have any money to pay for it. I said in my kind of intro remarks, we need to be enabling growth to prosper, and so I think it goes beyond, I agree, Smart Track, hugely important. I think we've got to start thinking very boldly and very ambitiously, which is why when we were so grumpy about the walk back on the tolls, our policy committee sat down and said, okay, what's the big idea to change this? And that's where, whether you love it or hate it, we came out with Superlinks. We've got 11 municipal transit agencies throughout here and Waterloo that do a brilliant job of managing transit flows in circles in their municipalities. It's simply not how our workforce works. It's not how our citizens navigate around the region. Superlinks is about something that would create enough scale that the infrastructure bank could get involved, that pension funds would take a look at it. If you layer on real estate development attached to those municipal transit network developments, all of a sudden that's something that's fundable on a quick basis. And while I am fully sympathetic to the argument that transit needs to be local, the reality is where technology is going to be, you don't need where your local bus is going to be managed by city council. And we've got too many examples throughout the region where city councils, I'm not talking about Toronto at the moment, but another city council has voted 54 times and still hasn't made a decision on a particular transit line. And the only people that are losing are those workers that need that transit line to access jobs. So our solution is we've got to think big, we've got to build for a future that we know is coming, and do it much more quickly than this municipal model has enabled us to of late.
Are you being heard, though? Does this have traction?
We are, well, let me tell you, if you can help us with that, what we're being heard, and I can tell you we're talking to all provincial parties, and a number of the municipalities are endorsing this as well, but the provincial parties are saying, where's the voter on this? What does the voter feel? So what we need to be doing is really galvanizing communities to understand what this means so that they can be influencing councillors and the province as well. So it's, again, as I said, we're saying we've got to think big and think into the future.
I want to drill down into the data, I guess, that we're working with and the thinking that we're working with. What don't we know? Or do we already know everything we need to know to resolve our congestion issues? Eric?
I actually think this is an area where we may not realize it, but we're actually data rich. We run, since 1986, we've been running at UOT in conjunction with the agencies, been running the largest urban travel survey program in the world. It's called Transportation Tomorrow Survey. Every 5 years, we survey 5% of the population. So we now have a 30-year time series of understanding travel behavior. We have the science. You know, Ben was talking about, we understand how freeways work and the physics of that. So, and we know how transit can work, and we know the transportation land use interactions. So I would argue we know a lot. Our problem is still in communications, in getting people and politicians to understand what works and what doesn't. So it's a communication thing for me. We can always have more information, but it's communication, not data for me.
But also, and we'll address this in our final question about the fact that we have 2 elections going, I think we've been ignoring the political aspects of it, because in Toronto, especially with civic administrations changing every couple of years, we come up with a plan, somebody runs against it, they win, the plan's dead, somebody runs against the new plan, on and on and on it goes. So just wanted to throw that in there. But back to, I guess, Ben, you must work with data and information a great deal as well.
Yeah, so I think a little bit more about the decision-making data and the financial data. And the data that municipal governments use to make decisions, the data that you see in municipal budgets, is an utter shambles. The way that cities budget is effectively like budgeting like a teenager. It's called a cash budget, whereas provinces and the federal government are on what's called an accrual budget. A cash budget is effectively thinking like a teenager, because if you think about, oh, I got $1,000 in from my summer job, I can maybe afford a cheap $1,000 car. But if you're thinking about it like an adult, like the provinces and what's called accrual accounting, you think, all right, I need to buy this $30,000 or $40,000 nice car. I don't have to, scrape together this cash right here this year. Well, I can take out a car payment and I'll pay for it over the lifetime of the asset. And that's how the city needs to be thinking about its financial data. Right now, the cities across Canada are just thinking about that cash in that they need to get to pay for an asset. And if you had to think about that for buying a house, for example, or a car, you'd think you're pretty poor and decide not to invest in transit or whatever kind of big asset yourself. So we need to rethink how cities look at their budgets, because right now it's an utter mess.
Okay. And I would say the area of data that we clearly have a gap is in the goods movement side. We found that as we tried to do our study. And the big issue with goods movement is how do you get houses built if you can't get the materials across the region? How do you get goods to market? The population growth that we're dealing with means consumption's increasing, so all of these things need to be factored in. So there's a lot that needs to be done on better data collection related to goods movement so we can better plan movement of goods alongside movement of people.
And not to be too much of a futurist, but I was interested in your quick thoughts on times are changing. I was reading this morning, I forget which autonomous car company it was, might have been Google, but they were already testing something for Phoenix, and they would have autonomous pickup and deliver cars within 2 years. So we talk about what data we have from the last many, many years, but are we ready for paradigm shifts in what is to come?
Yeah, there's no doubt we're in an age of tremendous disruption, both in terms of services and the technology, and things are going to change. That is a challenge from a data point of view. But I also want to warn that there's a tremendous amount of hype about all of this out there right now. And there's this sense in some quarters, or it's claimed that, for example, talking about congestion, autonomous vehicles are going to get rid of congestion. If you believe that, you're smoking something that isn't quite yet legal. Autonomous vehicles may improve things in many ways, but they're not going to eliminate the need, for example, major investment in transit. And my real concern is that it's real easy for politicians facing a $50 billion transit bill to say, oh, we don't have to spend that because autonomous vehicles will solve our problems. They're going to change things. They're not going to solve it absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we're excited. Sidewalk Labs is coming into Toronto, and we had a chance to meet with them in New York in November, and they took us through some of the work they're already doing with data in Toronto. One of the things they're looking at is autonomous vehicles for last mile and first mile connectivity, which is really, really interesting. So rather than having these big asphalt parking lots everywhere in the city to get you to your transit hub, imagine if you had car sharing or other services that are picking you up at home and getting you to the transit station and then getting you to your office or wherever you're going. And just imagine if that seamless fare integration on an app or something else. This is what's being talked about as the future of transit, and I think we've got an opportunity to pilot some of it here.
And this ties directly into what I was talking about, the land use problem. This is the way we're going to solve, and so I am very bullish on AVs in that sense. This is how we solve our suburban land use transit connection problem.
We have, sorry, Ben, did you want to go? Are you good? We have an election coming on the 7th of June. We're in a bit of a chaotic situation now, but we don't have to dig into the politics of it. We have a municipal election, obviously, happening in October. I'm wondering how do you believe these issues are getting the attention they deserve, and if not, how can we ensure that they do?
Yeah, well, so far, thank goodness, the debate has not been about, well, I want to draw a subway line here, no, I want to draw the LRT line here. The debate so far, and Jan's group has been leading this, is about how to make the decisions, what the governance of our transit authorities should be. And that's where we really need to make the most change, whether it's the Superlinks or there are other ideas about creating something more akin to the Vancouver model, which I'm a big fan of. That's where we need to be focusing. It's how the decisions are made.
I think elections are always tremendous opportunities to bring priorities forward, but they're not the only point in time. And, quite frankly, I think with the provincial election, I believe the parties that are running have already decided which platforms they're going to pursue. What we're putting forward will have hopefully some merits, but it's something that we're going to have to work with whatever administration gets elected in the future in terms of how do we move this forward. I mean, the board was formed in 1845, if you can believe it, a combination of government and business to get the rail and port system built to get our goods to market, and here we are, 2018, still talking about the same stuff. So it's not a point-in-time election. It's a good opportunity to raise issues, but it's something that we have to constantly hit home on.
And Eric, I have to imagine as someone who's probably very much into best practices as an engineer, it's frustrating to see best practices compromised by bad politics from time to time.
Well, yes, sorry, picking up on Ben's comment, I think we have suffered from the over-politicization of transportation in recent elections at both levels, but largely it has to do with, again, a given politician taking a fat crayon and drawing a line on the map and staking the election on that, or technology, to the notion that subways and LRT are somehow an ideological debating point rather than let's put the right technology in the right place. So I agree absolutely. If transportation process and commitment to improving transportation is part of the election, that's great. If people start arguing over the merit of road taxes or the merit of this line versus that line, we're back in the bad old days. We have to get past that.
When I do interviews, I have a practice at the end of saying, is there anything else you'd like to say? And often people have all sorts of things they'd like to say that we haven't touched on at all. So I'd like to ask each of you if there's something you'd like to add, or if you have a great flourishing closing statement, perhaps. Who wants to go first?
No, I just don't know that we're the only thing between us and lunch, so I'll be short.
Okay, anything you want to hammer home? Jan, sorry?
Yeah, I would simply say we've raised some interesting points today. If this is resonating, then connect with your leaders at TREB. We're working very, very closely on them, and we'd like to continue to get more stakeholders, more ambassadors for these messages. That's the best way to influence change, not having a single voice, but have many voices on the same topic.
Eric?
And I guess coming back to the political thing, I guess I still believe in evidence-based decision-making, but I think that's only going to happen if the public asks for better evidence and pushes their politicians to not just say, I'm doing this because I think it's right. You have to push them to say why, how does that fit with the facts? We live in an era of fake news and alternative facts. Fortunately, it's not quite that bad here yet, but we will only have evidence-based decision-making if all of us collectively push our decision-makers to do it that way.
Thank you very much, Eric, Jan, and Ben. It's been a great discussion, and I love that we were able to pool all of your expertise on this. Thank you.